Hey, welcome to the Eddie Hyatt podcast. I am your host and teacher, Eddie Hyatt, and I'm so glad to be back with you today as we continue our journey through the book of Acts. This series we are calling Life Changing Lessons from the Book of Acts. And, just as I was coming on, I remembered something in Acts 13. Now, we had gotten over into Acts 14 yesterday. I'm going to back up and just share with you a very powerful truth, and it has to do with the sending forth of Paul and Silas. I'm sorry, Paul and Barnabas. Silas becomes Paul's traveling partner in his second missionary journey. But back in Acts 13, we had, at this time, he's still called Saul. Now, a little bit later, Luke is going to start using the word Paul. But at this time, he's called Saul, and Saul and Barnabas and others at the church in Antioch, they're gathering together to minister to the Lord and fast. This is Acts 13:1. And in the midst of that fasting, seeking the Lord, ministering to him, the Holy Spirit speaks and says, "Separate me, Saul and Barnabas, for the work to which I have called them." Then in verse 3, it says, "Then having fasting and prayed, and laid hands on them, that is the church there, the other believers there in Antioch." Now, when I say church, there's not a church building. There is no evidence of a church building with a steeple on top, a cross on top, of that sort of thing. There's no evidence of that until the well, s- probably what I'm describing there wouldn't be probably until the fourth century at the time of Constantine. But as far as a special building built for the church to gather in, there's no evidence of that until the second century. The church is people, and in this early period, they're gathering primarily in homes, although they will rent public spaces, like Paul did in Ephesus. He rented a lecture hall called the School of Tyrannus. So these people that made up the church, the community that was a part of this group, ministering to the Lord and fasting. After the Holy Spirit spoke, they prayed, they fasted some more, and then they laid hands on Paul and Barnabas. And verse 4 says, or verse 3 says, on them, and they, the other believers, they sent them away. Then verse 4 says, so being sent out by the Holy Spirit. Now, who sent them out? Was it the church in Antioch, or was it the Holy Spirit? It's very interesting. The two words translated sent here in English, they are two different words in Greek. For example, the one speaking of the church in Antioch, in verse 3, that says, and having fasted and prayed and laid hands on them, they sent them away. But that word means to loose. It's sort of like loosing an oxen from his yoke and turning him loose. He's been working all day, and they take the yoke off and they loose him. They let him go free. So it means to loose and to let go. But verse 4 says, and they being sent forth. Now that word, it literally means to be launched out, to be sent, to be launched out. So here's what I see from this. When the believers there in Antioch, when they realized that God had spoken, that he had a different plan for Saul and Barnabas, they freed them from any obligation. They freed them from any expectations or any commitments that they had made to the church in any Antioch. They loosed them from any commitments and obligations because they saw that God was sending them forth. But then it was the Holy Spirit who spoke and who launched them and sent them forth. Now, this principle I'm talking about, let me tell you a personal story. I grew up in a small rural church, Assembly of God church, that my dad pastored in Chicota, Texas, little rural community in northeast Texas. And uh, I rededicated my life to the Lord there after serving 3 years in the U.S. Army between 66 and 69. I was baptized in the Holy Spirit there. I was called to preach and preach my first sermon there. And so there is some real deep emotional connections there. And so anyway, uh, after I got married, Sue and I went to Canada, and and God had called us there, and we were establishing a congregation and a ministry, and God used us greatly during those 8 years, and a lot of people, including Sue's family, came to the Lord. But I remember I was, and also I ministered there. I don't know that I ever had the title, but I functioned as like an assistant pastor to my dad, um, while I was in Bible school, and for a year after I got out of Bible school, I taught the adult Sunday school class. I would preach just about at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. And so anyway, the story I'm going to tell you, I was back for a visit from Canada. Now, this has been many, many years ago. So I'm at this time, I'm in my early 30s. And there was a little old lady in that church. We called her Sister Parker. And she, in a sense, she's always looked old to me. From the time I was a kid. And wore her hair in a bun and was like she was stooped over. Her shoulders were kind of stooped, and I was down for a visit, and I had preached, and my dad and I was at the back of at the front door. We were shaking hands with people as they go out, and this little lady, she took my hand and she turned and looked up at me, and she said, "I'm a praying that you won't be able to stay up there." You hear that? I'm a praying you won't be able to stay up there. Well, I had been feeling a lot of pull and strain in my soul, in the spirit, and and now I'm discovering what it is. What it is, and who knows? Maybe my mother was praying the same way. Anyway, I said to her, I said, "No, don't pray like that." I said, "Ask God to bless our ministry there. God has called us there. Don't pray that I can't stay up there. Pray that God will bless our time there." My friends, we have to be careful that we don't use prayer in a manipulative way. And that's as actually getting over into the area of witchcraft, where we're trying to use prayer to control people and situations, and make it work out the way we want it to work out. Well, I realized that I needed to do something. So I preached again on a Sunday night. It was my last night there. And so I said to this congregation, I said, I said, I told, now, Sue wasn't there, and I'm not sure what the situation was, but I said to them, I said, God has called Sue and I to Canada, and we are uh, planting a new congregation and a Bible school, and people are coming to Jesus, and I said, I need your agreement. I need you to be in agreement with me. So what I'm doing, I'm getting them to do to me what the church at Antioch did for Paul and Barnabas. And I said, this was after I'd preached my message. I said, I'm going to come down here and stand, and I want you all to come around and lay hands on me. Now, I asked for the whole congregation to do this. I said, come around and lay hands on me, and pray God's blessing upon me, and upon the blessing, and upon Sue and me, and upon the ministry to which He has called us up there in Canada. So they did, and I know they were sincere, because I had grown up there. They'd known me since I was a kid, and they'd seen God work in my life. So they truly cared about me. But sometimes here can be an emotional thing, and and can cause people to act in a way that's not in line with God's will and purpose. So anyway, they gathered around, and sincerely they laid hands on me and prayed, and God's blessing, and something changed. Something changed. You see, at that moment, in their emotions, where it was, they loosed me from any obligation. Oh, he needs to be here ministering. We want him back here. They loosed me. They freed me from any sense of obligation and commitment that I ought to be there, and they blessed me in what God had called me to do, and I experienced an immediate change. in our ministry there in Canada. So, folks, it wasn't the church in Antioch that sent them out. The church in Antioch loosed them, blessed them, and loosed them and freed them from any commitments or obligations because they recognize what God is doing. So, my friends, we need to be ready to bless our friends, family members, friends, members of a congregation. If God is calling them on to someplace else, we need to be ready to recognize that and say, brother, sister, I loose you from any commitments you've made here to me, any obligations. I believe this is of God. So I bless you, and I'm in agreement with you that the Holy Spirit is sending you forth, and we're in agreement for God's blessing on this new venture in your life. So what a powerful lesson that was. Oh, I think this is going to be really relative to somebody listening today. You're going to see something in this, and you're going to apply it to a real life situation that you are in right now. Hey, I'm Eddie Hyatt. This is the Eddie Hyatt Podcast. Check out my website, eddiehyatt.com, and I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. God bless you.